Okay, so welcome to part two of the American Revolution notes. We're starting off today with the Gaspee Affair. The Gaspee Affair is basically about a British ship that actually patrolled the borders of the colonies. A lot of the colonists really despised the Gaspee and the people aboard the Gaspee because they were really ruthless in how they would search the colonist ships. Of course, they would just search without any kind of reason to search, just to say, "Hey, I think you're smuggling goods in. Um, I don't think that you're being honest," and maybe like would confiscate things pretty frequently. They were also known for stopping along the coast, and when they would stop along the coast, they would just take food or take whatever they wanted. Very rude, very ruthless, and so to get back at them, a group of colonists decided that they would set the ship on fire and sink it. And so what happened is basically to get back at them, the British decide that they're going to take people from the colonies who were involved and they are going to try them by a vice admiralty court in Britain, and their punishments are going to be harsh. So when this happens, a bunch of the colonists decide that they need something needs to be done. So the Committee of Correspondence is created after the burning of the Gaspee because 150 colonists are sent to Great Britain to be tried for this burning. Rhode Island had a lot more people who were tried, and so they were like wanting the other colonies to help them, but they needed help communicating with one another. And so Thomas Jefferson created the Committee of Correspondence so that people can communicate better and work better to prevent men, from their hometowns from being sent over to Britain to be tried because that was unfair. They wanted to be tried by their own peers in their own home or hometowns. Um, if you remember from the last lecture, I told you that all the taxes had pretty much stopped after the Boston Massacre, the Bloody Massacre, except for the tea tax. And so colonists at this point had been smuggling tea in from other territories. And so they'd smuggle the tea in. It was a lot cheaper. They were fine with that. They didn't want to buy tea from Boston. They didn't want to buy tea from Britain. So what happened was basically the East India Tea Company, which is the British tea company that was selling the colonies tea, had gone into a lot of debt. And so the British decided that they would refund 4/5 of taxes to ship tea to the colonies for this particular company. It made tea cheaper in the colonies, even cheaper than like the tea that they were smuggling in. And this really like outraged a lot of the merchants, not because the tea was cheaper and they were like upset about it. They were just upset that they were actually getting cut out of the deal because the East India Tea Company would sell directly to shopkeepers rather than to merchants who would then take the tea to shopkeepers in different towns. So that was kind of a deal breaker for them. So the Committee of Correspondence, they all decide to, talk together, and they decide that they're not going to sell the tea. They're not going to allow the tea to be sold. In New York and Philadelphia, they force the East India Tea Company to return home. They just say, you know what, we're not buying your tea. Take it back where it came from. In Charleston, they hide the tea in a warehouse. Like they think they're like slick, they're like, we're just going to hide it and no one will be able to buy it. Meanwhile, in Boston, you have a bunch of men who dress up and, decide to throw the tea overboard. And if you notice, they've got several cases. I think there's like hundreds of cases, and, it's like bricks of tea. So they waste hundreds and thousands of dollars by doing this, and this outrages the British. So the British, in response, issue the coercive acts or the intolerable acts. They basically say, you know what, we're shutting Boston's port down till the tea is paid for. Government positions in Boston are going to be appointed by the British chosen governor. All trials are going to be transferred to a vice admiralty court. You guys are going to house British soldiers, and we're just tired of your crap. And so Boston is paying really heavily for their little stunt that they've recently pulled. So what happens is basically everybody gets so upset they eventually decide to meet. The First Continental Congress gets together September 5th, 1774 in Philadelphia. So 55 delegates from 12 colonies get together and they agree that they're going to boycott all goods from Britain, and they're going to disobey Boston laws. This is where Patrick Henry stands up and says, I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. This is also where we issue a declaration of rights and grievances, where we say, you know what, we're loyal to the king, but we're not buying your goods, and we're not really going to have anything to do with this. So they also agree at the First Continental Congress that if nothing happens within a year, they're going to have a Second Continental Congress, and we'll see what else we can do next year. So that's all not fine and dandy until Lexington and Concord. So the British had planned to raid colonial military supplies at Concord, and Patriot leaders had heard about the plan and decided to send Paul Revere and William Dawes, who were pretty fast riders, to sound the alarm and let everybody know, hey, we want to get our military supplies out of Concord before the British come and raid it. So they make it to Lexington, and they warn people that the British are coming there, and they're basically like, get the militia together, get the Minutemen together. We need to be ready to fight. So a third man, Dr. Samuel Prescott, actually joins them. They then head for Concord. They always leave out Samuel Prescott. Like, nobody knows Samuel Prescott. A British patrol stops Revere and Dawes, and Prescott keeps going, and he actually makes it in time to warn Concord. When the British troops arrived in Lexington, they were met with 70 Minutemen. Shots rang out, and 8 of their Minutemen were killed. Then they come to Concord, and the British military were too late because, old Prescott had already gotten there and told everybody they needed to get rid of the military supplies. So they're forced to retreat because they run into 400 colonial militia. They have no other choice but to retreat because they weren't expecting a full-on militia to meet them at Concord. And the colonial militia use guerrilla warfare, and they diminish the British and make them retreat. And of course, this is amazing because these are just your everyday kind of farmers, merchants. These aren't soldiers that are fighting against one of the greatest militaries in the world. So the militia from all over New England surrounded Boston and trapped the British. And it was a major victory, a really big morale boost for everyone. Right after the Lexington and Concord, the Second Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia. Congress votes to adopt the militia surrounding Boston basically as the United Colonies militia. They select George Washington to be the commander of this new army. Remember, George Washington has this reputation of being a war hero from the French and Indian War. People respect him, people look up to him. He's someone who is quiet and wise and will be a strong leader. So the British had been determined to take Bunker Hill north of Boston because they wanted to free the men who had been surrounded after Lexington and Concord. So the militia comes back and they build a fort on Breed's Hill near Bunker Hill. Keep in mind, being on a hill is an advantage because you can see the enemy and fire on your enemy pretty good. General Gage sends 2,200 troops to take Bunker Hill from the militia. And our American commander, William Prescott, says, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. Basically, don't waste any of your weapons. Don't waste your ammo. We're in a position, we're in a really good position. They're sending in a lot more troops than we've got, but we can do this. So the militia stopped 2 British attacks, and they only retreated whenever they ran out of ammunition. So this is another instance where American confidence is really boosted to show that they can stand up to one of the world's most feared armies. Who knows how things would have turned out had they had enough ammunition, had they had enough supplies. But for this particular point in time, it was still a victory for morale at this point. So here we have Common Sense and Independence. This should be pretty much a review for you. You probably heard of the Common Sense pamphlet. So colonists weren't ready to break away from Great Britain even after Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill. They were still wanting to have this relationship with Britain. They still considered themselves British. They just wanted to have their own rights and freedoms. So the Continental Congress sends an olive branch petition to King George III, stating their loyalty to the king and their desire to call off all the hostility. They want to all get along. We just want our rights. When it became clear that the British were not backing down, more patriots began to think that the time had come to declare independence. So the public opinion became official when Thomas Paine issued Common Sense. In this pamphlet, he writes that basically Parliament didn't do all this stuff. They didn't issue all these laws, all these declarations without support from the king. You guys have got it messed up. King George III is a tyrant, just like Parliament. There's no need in trying to build relationships with him or trying to mend relationships with him. It's time to declare independence. We don't want to be under his rule anymore. Within 3 months, Common Sense had sold over 100,000 copies in the colonies. So your support for independence surges after this. So on July 4th, 1776, Thomas Jefferson drafts the Declaration of Independence explaining why it's time for independence. The Continental Congress issued the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, and this kind of sparks the American Revolution. This is where things start getting really serious. The colonies had become the United States of America in their eyes. They were a united nation, separate from Britain. And here's our Declaration of Independence. I like to put it on here and kind of state that, the men's names who are listed on this, the men who signed this declaration, were definitely facing treason if they were captured because they were fighting against their home country for independence. So it was a treasonous act, and for them to sign was obviously a show of how courageous they were and how serious they took the cause. So when it comes to the fighting, we look at the two different sides. The colonies had some advantages and disadvantages, as well as the British. They had some advantages and disadvantages as well. So some of the colonial advantages were the fact that they were fighting on home ground. They knew the land well. They had great generals who made great decisions, great strategical decisions. And the fact that they were fighting for their rights and their freedoms really made a huge difference as well, because they're passionate about what they're fighting for, and they're willing to die for the cause if they need to. They're going to fight hard for it. They also have the French alliance because the French hate the British because, they had just lost in a war against the British. They're providing loans, naval support, and troops eventually. It takes some time for them to provide troops, but they do. They also have time. The longer the war drags on, the more likely the British are to just give up and go home because they're tired of spending money on the colonies. Some disadvantages, you have untrained soldiers. As I've stated before, you've got a lot of militiamen who are basically like shopkeepers, farmers, like your average everyday kind of Joes. They know how to shoot guns, yes, but they're not trained soldiers. You also have a weak and divided central government in the colonies. Meanwhile, with the British, their advantages are the fact that they have a well-trained and well-supplied army and navy. They're also rich in resources. They don't have to worry about running out of supplies or weapons or ammunition. They're fine. They're good to go. They also have a really strong central government. British is established. They are one of the strongest militaries in the world. They know what's up. Some disadvantages, they're fighting in unfamiliar hostile territory. They are fighting far from Britain, which, a lot of them probably just want to go home. They're probably tired. It's hard for them to fight. And a lot of them are fighting as mercenaries, meaning they are being paid to fight. And they don't really care about the cause. So there's not a whole lot of oomph to their fight. You don't have as much passion in their fight. You also have half-hearted support at home. There's a lot of people in Britain that are just let the colonies just be independent. Forget about it. Then you have some people that are wanting to fight. And so it causes a lot of trouble in Britain. Dun, dun, dun. So I'm not going over a whole lot of battles. I'm just going over the main ones. So the battles in the north that are really noteworthy are where Washington crosses the Delaware. On Christmas Day, 1776, him and 2,400 men journey across the icy Delaware River and attack the British camp at Trenton in the middle of a sleet storm. It is a major American victory, morale boost, everything. And you can't imagine how miserable that whole battle must have been. So that just goes to show that, like, we were willing to go the extra mile to win this particular war. The British took Philadelphia in March of 1777, and so that was kind of a disappointment. But America ended up defeating General Burgoyne at the Battle of Saratoga, and once we had defeated him at the Battle of Saratoga, is whenever we got French troops sent to the Americans to help us fight. If we hadn't won the Battle of Saratoga, I think that the French might not have ever sent troops. Who knows? But that's what we really needed. We had supplies that they were sending us. We had food and stuff that they were sending us. Not saying that we were like in the greatest shape, but we needed men, like actual soldiers, more than anything. And so that really was a turning point in the war. Here's Washington crossing the Delaware. If you look, you see the ice in the river. You see that they've got their sticks. They've got, so they look cold. I don't know. They look like they need some heavier coats on. But it's a very majestic photo of Washington, ready to face the day, ready to, take on the British. The British are finally defeated at Yorktown. Yorktown's kind of the final straw because a lot of the colonials had, gained support from other countries who had previously lost war to Great Britain. And so they had a lot of extra supplies. They had a lot of weapons, a lot more ammo, and more soldiers. So General Cornwallis, who is the British commander, like one of the last great British commanders that are left in the war, is forced to surrender the Americans in Washington at Yorktown in 1781. And when he surrenders, everyone else basically surrenders too, because they're like, oh my gosh, like if Cornwallis is out, like we're all out, it's over. So the British surrender the entire war, and the Treaty of Paris is signed 2 years later, which officially recognizes Americans as the United States of America. This video clip is just to, if you've seen The Patriot, it's just Cornwallis being a coward and not wanting to surrender and sending someone else to surrender for him. So I just love it because it's, patriotic as all get out, and proud to be American. So after overthrowing the British government, the former colonies feared a strong central government, and so instead of creating a strong central government, they create a weak one in the Articles of Confederation. It's our first constitution, and it is crap. And so since the Articles of Confederation don't allow for, the government to deal with the nation's problems, delegates meet in 1787 to amend them. And instead of amending them, they throw them out and they create a completely new government. So those who supported the Constitution are known as Federalists because they support a stronger federal government. Those who don't support it are called Anti-Federalists. They don't support a strong federal government. So these delegates wrote the Constitution, which created a federal system. A federal system just basically means that you've got a government where power is shared between the federal government and the state governments. You also have 3 branches of government, which are the executive, which is our president, the legislative, our lawmaking body, and the judicial, which is our Supreme Court. Thank you, Montesquieu. His ideas on separation of power are really useful whenever creating this form of government. We also use a lot of other men's ideas, Enlightenment thinkers' ideas, when writing the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The Constitution was put into effect after 9 of 13 states ratified it. It's still a living document today. The only reason that it was ratified and supported by so many people was because we added a Bill of Rights for it to be ratified. So Congress proposed 12 amendments, and the states approved 10 amendments. So the first 10 amendments, known as our Bill of Rights, guarantee the freedom of religion, speech, press, petition, and assembly, the right to bear arms, protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, trial by jury, blah, 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 so on and so forth. Most of the rights came from ideas from John Locke and other Enlightenment thinkers, like I said before. So many intellectuals in Europe and America, once we had created this new form of government based on Enlightenment thinkers' ideas, were kind of amazed because a lot of people had just read about Enlightenment ideas. They had never really tried the Enlightenment ideas before or actually applied them to a government. And so once people started to see that, it worked for the United States, then other countries started to follow suit, like France with their revolution. Their revolution is completely different, but that's another note. So this creates creates hope for a new age, a better society, and a better world with these ideas that everyone can be equal, everyone can be treated respectfully, and so on and so forth. So this is the end of the American Revolution chapter. I would go ahead and start working on the study guide. Study guide assignment is for tomorrow, and then your test will be Wednesday, September 2nd.